It began as a software tweak by Apple to increase security on the devices running Apple's newest operating system, iOS 8. Now it has turned into a heated debate between the U.S. Federal Bureau of Investigation and high-tech corporations over how much personal information law enforcement agencies can demand to see. Apple says its new encryption protects users' iPhone privacy. The FBI says the policy puts important evidence off limits to investigators. Joining me right now is VOA web reporter Doug Bernard to talk about this. Thank you so much for joining me.
Happy to be here.
What's going on here?
So this happened fairly recently, back in September, when the new operating system was released, the system for mobile devices, so iPhones and iPads. There was this tweak which bolstered encryption. Now remember, encryption is the way that data on your phone is scrambled, so nobody can just pick it up and kind of start poking around, seeing everything that's in there. Well, with that tweak came a very important change. Because the encryption was stronger, Apple basically said, we will not be able to unlock these phones anymore. Now, in the past, if local law enforcement or the FBI had a valid warrant, Apple would unlock the phone and then the police could search it. Now, with this change, Apple says it's just not practical for them to do that anymore. So unless somebody voluntarily unlocks their phone, everything in there is basically off limits.
Is this a publicity stunt from Apple? Because you know, and a lot of us know, that FBI can get their hands on anything that they want.
Well, it sort of depends where you live, I guess. If you're here in the United States, it's true that the USA PATRIOT Act gives the FBI and local law enforcement wide latitude in terms of searching what you do online. They can subpoena information from your mobile phone company, your internet service provider, and you have to imagine that a great deal of the information on your phone came or went somewhere. So that's pretty much, they can still get at that kind of stuff. It could be, I suppose one could call it a PR stunt. One could also call it a marketing ploy, because a lot of Apple's customers are overseas. They're not subject to the USA PATRIOT Act, but of course we've all been reading about the Edward Snowden revelation, so people say they want better encryption standards.
And the FBI Director, James Comey, he's saying that to get their job done, they need access to this data. So he's got a point.
He very much has a point, and it's rather unusual, I think, for an FBI director to come out so publicly and so strongly critical. He did this almost immediately after Apple announced the change, and he's kept up his attack. Just recently in Washington, at a speech, he referred to encryption taking us to, quote, a very, very dark place, and warned of potentially dire problems that could affect lots of people by this inability of law enforcement, they say, to unlock somebody's phone and see, look for what might be incriminating evidence.
And Apple's not alone in this. Google, that's providing the Android operating system, they're in this same situation.
That's right. Very shortly after Apple announced its change, Google announced a very similar change for the Android system as well.
Okay. Where do you think it's going to go, if you could tell us in 30 seconds?
It's fascinating because I think the U.S. Supreme Court really provided earlier this year a bit of a wind vane. This is not a group of people who are very highly advanced technologically, but they seem to understand clearly how sensitive mobile phones are, how much personal sensitive information is on there. They had two rulings that really knocked back law enforcement's ability to search. So I think we're going to keep seeing, in effect, this continued push for greater encryption and giving people more control over who can see what's on their phone.
If I put encryption on my phone, no one can read my messages?
Yes, as long as you remember your passcode. Now, depending on the encryption you use, if you forget your passcode, if you've got strong encryption, nobody's ever going to be able to unlock it.
All right, fascinating. Thank you so much for joining us.
Happy to be here.
VOA web reporter Doug Bernard.